Hello everybody and welcome to the Brute Force Academy, okay? And in today's video, what we're going to be doing is talking about how to use state in a React class component to control a form, okay? And in the process of doing that, what we're going to also do is build out this nice little application right here, okay? So let me give you a little example of how this thing works. I'll just type in some stuff right here, blah blah blah, yada yada yada, okay, and I'll send the message. We can see we get a nice little toast notification, right? And my phone just went off. Let's go ahead and let's check Gmail right now. And we can see that we get a message. We see blah blah blah, yada yada yada. Okay. So just a nice little use case right there. You know, say for example, you're doing some freelance development for a mom and pop shop and they want a way for people to contact them about their product or service. Well, we can kill two birds with one stone. We can learn how to work with forms and we can make a nice little application in the process. Okay, so if that sounds good to you, go ahead and stick around and let's get started. Okay guys, so we're gonna get set up right now. One quick little warning is that in this video, I won't be teaching you how state works exactly. If you're interested in learning that, I made a video on that last week, so I'll go ahead and put a link to it in the description, or maybe put a card up on the page so you can check that out if you're interested. Okay, this video is mostly gonna talk about using state to control forms and some of the gotchas that can come with that. Okay, so just a quick warning on that. And then what I have right here is a new project I made. I just called this contact page, since that's kind of what we're creating right here. Okay, and then I've initialized a create React app template by coming into my terminal and just saying npx create-react-app space dot. Okay, and then this will just download all of the create React app stuff into my contact page project. Okay, so there's two other third-party packages that we're gonna need. So let's go ahead and install those now. Those packages are called react-toastify and email.js-com. Okay, so let's just go ahead and npm install those. You can type install out manually or just type I for the shortcut. Okay, and the first one I said was react-toastify. Okay, that's the little pop-up that shows up when we send an email. That's called a toast. Okay, I don't know why they call it that. And then the other package that we're going to need is email.js-com. Okay, so we'll go ahead and install those, and I'll pause the video and come back when it's done. Okay guys, so the package is finished installing, and what I've done just now is I kind of cleared out all of the extra stuff that Create React App gives us, just so we can focus on what we're doing right here. Okay, so I deleted a lot of the extra files in the source directory, okay, and then I took some stuff out of my index.js. Okay, so if you want to copy what this looks like, go ahead. And then this is what my app.js file looks like, and then all I have in the CSS file is a bunch of nothing, a bunch of nothingness. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to code out the form that we're going to build. Okay, and then I'll just show the code on the screen so you can kind of pause it and copy the styles and all that good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to pause the screen and then come back when we're done, so I don't spend an hour and a half making a 10-minute video on state. Okay, so I'm going to do that now, and yeah. Okay guys, so I finished coding out all of the basic JSX structure that we need. Okay, so all we really have is a wrapper div with a class name of app that has everything inside of it. Okay, and then we also have a div with a class name of contact text. It's the best name I could think of at the time. And we just put an H1 and a paragraph tag in there, and then right below that we have a form that has some label and input combinations in here. You know, so we got a first name, a last name. This one has a type of email down here, and then this guy down here which I realize I have a typo in right there. That is a text area, okay? So you can copy all this JSX right here, and then in terms of the CSS, it's really nothing too crazy. It's just a bunch of, page layout stuff, flexbox, typography, drop shadow, stuff like that. So I'll just kind of scroll down the page so you can kind of see everything that we have here. Okay, I know it's kind of a lot, right? So let's go ahead and start the server and take a look at what we are getting here. Okay, so if we just open up our integrated terminal and type npm start, that's going to run the create react app start script that they gave to us for free. Okay, and I'll give that a second to load. Okay, and this is what our app is looking like, and I think the only thing that I want to change really quick is the font family. Okay, so how about instead of using this sans serif font, how about we just give everything a serif font, which is like the less defined looking text. Okay, so we can just come into the app class right here since it's wrapping everything else that we see in our page, and I'll just say font family. I'll say serif, okay, and then I will save that. Okay, and it's looking exactly the same because apparently the one that I want is sans serif, okay, and that gives us the less defined one. I always forget which one is which, okay. I got a 50-50 chance of figuring it out on the first try, okay. So this is the form that we're going to be working with, okay? Nothing too crazy here. And if you're wondering where I got the inspiration for this form, okay, I kind of just Googled contact page inspiration, and I found this right here that looks almost exactly the same, okay? And if you guys are getting into freelance development and you're not the best designer ever, what I'll tell you is that what you probably want to do is take this idea that I learned about in a book called Steal Like an Artist, and that idea is literally just steal like an artist, okay? So if you haven't read that book, it's a nice little short read. But he basically presents the idea that nothing in this world is original, and all artists really do is they find a handful of ideas from a bunch of different other artists, and they put them all together and tweak them just slightly, and then they call something their own, okay? And that's what I did here. Obviously, if I was freelancing, I'd probably tweak it a little bit more than what they did right here. But the good thing about that is that, there are professional designers out there that are way better designers than I'll ever be. And it makes it pretty easy for me. I don't really have to come up with these great ideas for nice, sleek contact pages. I can just kind of see what kind of ideas I want to use and kind of use them in my own situation, and lucky for us, we have Chrome DevTools. Okay, so if you don't know how to code this in CSS, you can just right click and click on inspect, and then you can just go ahead and click on this little blue mouse icon and hover over whatever you want to copy. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to see the styles that are being applied to this button right here. I can just click on that or find it in the DOM and then expand this page up, and what do you know? We have all the styles that we need to have this nice fancy little button, Same idea for figuring out how they did that drop shadow right there. I can just click it, scroll down, and I see this is how they are getting their drop shadow. One of these rules. Okay, so go ahead and steal like an artist, and if you get in trouble for copywriting, don't blame me, okay? This is just a recommendation, but I digress, okay? So that is the basic setup of our project. We have our packages, we have our JSX and our CSS, okay? And now what we're gonna do is dive into the state portion of this tutorial and figure out how to control this form right here, okay? Okay, so before we dive into all the code, I really just want to take a second to answer the question that you may be thinking, which is, why do we need to control this form in the first place? You may be thinking, couldn't we just type our values in here manually and send it the way we would any other regular HTML form? And the answer is you could do that, but the reason that we'd want to have React be in control of everything that's going on with this form is that we want to provide a nice, seamless, single-page application experience, okay? That's part of the reason of why we're coding in React in the first place, okay? And part of that means that we really shouldn't ever have to refresh the entire page, okay? So you'll notice here, if I go ahead and click this send button, it may be hard to tell, but this little icon up here is refreshing, okay? The entire page is refreshing whenever I click this button, which is the default behavior of a form in HTML, okay? So in order to provide that seamless single-page experience of just having pieces of the page re-render as opposed to having the entire page re-render, we need React to know what's being typed in here, and we need React to be in charge of sending that data to wherever it needs to go and then returning this form to its empty state whenever that process is complete. Okay, so that's just kind of why we have to use React to be in control of this form right here. Okay, so without further ado, let's write the code. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do in order to make sure that React is aware of whatever we're typing inside of these input values right here is we need to create some state inside of our application that will correspond with each input element, okay? So we're gonna have a piece of state for the first name, a piece of state for the last name, the email, and the message. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just do that right now. So what we can do is just come right below the class definition, okay, and then I can type rconst, all right, and then I get this nice boilerplate state for me, okay, and the snippet for that was rconst, and in case you don't have it, that is coming from the React snippets extension. So if you just click on these little boxes right here and search for React, what you'll find is a ES7 React Redux GraphQL. It's basically a extension that you can put into your VS Code, and they give you a bunch of little snippets, and then what they'll do is provide to you some boilerplate code after you type the snippet and click enter. So it's a real lifesaver, saves you a lot of time. So as I mentioned, what we need right here is a piece of state for the first name, last name, email, and message. So let's just go ahead and type that out. I'll say first name, that's going to be an empty string. I'll say last name, that's going to be an empty string. Email, empty string, and message. And in case you don't know already, this is going to be an empty string. Okay, so we have our initial state right here, and in order to make React aware of what's being typed in here, we have to give each of these inputs a value attribute, and the value is going to be equal to whatever state value that this input corresponds with, okay? So for example, we see we have this first name input. The value of this is going to be this dot state dot first name, okay? Because, you know, that's kind of like the corresponding state that goes to this input element, right? So the value is going to be this dot state dot first name, okay? And then what we can go ahead and do is just repeat that process for the last name, the email, and the text area. So where did I put it the first time? I put it right below the type. Okay, so in order to remain consistent, I'll just do it the same way every time, since consistency is a good practice for the most part. So I'll say this dot state dot last name. I'll come down here. This guy is going to be value. You're going to be this dot state dot email, and then this text area down here. I'm just going to make this a multi-line thing so it's a little bit easier to digest, okay? And then I'm going to say your value is going to be this dot state dot message. Okay, so now React is aware of what exists inside of these input elements, okay? And if I pop open my React DevTools, okay, and by the way, if you don't have this extension installed, I talked about it in my React State video, so go ahead and check that out if you're not aware. But if we go ahead and come to our Components tab right here, we can see here is our app component, and we have some state for all of these input values, okay? So now whenever I type something in here, React should know what's being typed in here. The only problem is that when I come in here, I'm typing, I'm not seeing anything, okay? And the reason for that is that when we came in here and we provided all of these inputs a value, okay, we said your value is going to be, I guess in the example of this first name input, we said, hey, your value is going to be whatever this .state.firstname is. And if we take a look at this .state.firstname, that's just an empty string, okay? So no matter what happens if we type in here, we can't change it because its value is already set. If I were to change this from an empty string to Billy, okay, and then I save, I can see that Billy is inside of my input, and I can't get Billy to go away. He just won't leave us alone, okay? Let's go ahead and change that back. Okay, so we're kind of halfway there, right? React is aware of what is going on inside of these input elements. The only problem is that we don't have a way to change the value of what's inside of these input elements. Okay, so that's the second piece of the puzzle. We got to figure out how to change these values once React knows what is being typed in here. Okay, so let's figure out how to do that. Okay, so now that React is aware of what is inside of these input elements right here, what we have to do next is write the code that says, hey, whenever we interact with this element, we want to update the state value so that we can actually type some stuff into here, okay? So the way we would do that with our input elements is by providing an onChange event, okay? So certain HTML attributes have access to events, which is literally just like events that happen when the user interacts with that element, okay? So you can read a little bit more about that on Developer Mozilla, but you know, they'll kind of explain to you that input, select, and text areas, they have access to the onChange event. This onChange event will run every time we come into this input element and type some stuff. So really quick, what we'll do is we'll just provide a callback function using the arrow function syntax. And what we'll just do is say console.log onChange triggered, okay? And then if we take a look in our console, now we can see whenever I type in this input field, I can see that onChange is triggered, and that doesn't mean that it's very angry. It means that the onChange event is getting triggered, it's getting called, it's firing every time I type on my keyboard and interact with this input element. Okay, so that's pretty cool, but where do we go from here? Well, one thing that we can do whenever we are inside of an event, well, the callback functions that we provide have access to this parameter called event, okay? And this is another thing that you can read about on Developer Mozilla. Okay, but this event reference that we're using in our callback function right here basically has access to a ton of information that is going on with the input element and what's being typed in and a whole bunch of other stuff, okay? So what we can do is we can just update our console.log statement right here. How about we just go ahead and append the event reference onto this console.log statement. So we're going to say, hey, onChange was triggered, and we're just going to take a look at this reference that apparently we have access to, okay? And disregard all those crazy warnings right now, okay? We're going to work through them. And now if I come in here and I type a letter, I can see that onChange is triggered, okay? It's very angry, and I see this crazy object right here. Okay, so if we go ahead and we expand this, we can see that we have access to a bunch of stuff right here. Okay, but the most common things that we're going to be taking advantage of is the target. Okay, and the target is basically the input element that we're interacting with. You can see as we hover on this, it highlights the element that we were typing into. So this target object is pretty useful, but what we want to do is we want to scroll down, okay, and then expand this because there are a ton of options here, and you don't need to memorize any of these. But what we want to do is drill down into this value right here. Okay, so why is this value special right here? Well, this value is going to have the value of whatever we typed into our input element. So what we can do is we can quickly just test that out. Instead of console.logging this entire event reference, how about we console.log event.target? Okay, that's the input element that we were interacting with. Okay, and then what we want is the value that was typed into that input element. Okay, so whenever we type in here now, what it's going to do is tap into that event reference, then tap into this input element object right here, and then it's going to get the value of whatever was typed in. Okay, so if we just take a look in the console, I'll clear everything out here, and now let's just go ahead and type something. We see an A. I typed an A. I'm going to type an S, a D, F. I'm going to type 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you can see that onChange is running every time I type something in here, and then we're able to get whatever character was typed by tapping into the event.target.value properties. Okay, so how does this tie in with our state right here? Well, right now our state for this first name input right here is just set to be an empty string. But what we want to do is we want to take the character that was just typed into the input element, and we want to set the state to be whatever we're typing out as we go. Okay, so the way we'll do that is if we get rid of our console.log statement, what we can do is call this.setState, okay, and we'll provide a brand new state object. And since this is the first name input element, what we're going to want to do is overwrite the first name state property. Okay, so first name is going to be equal to event.target.value. Okay, so if we save that, what we can do is we can come in here and we can see now we're free to type whatever we want. And if we go into our components tab right here, okay, and we take a look, we can see that our first name piece of state is getting updated. Okay, so now React is aware of what is going on inside of this input element, and we also have the ability to update this every time we type something in here. Okay, so really quickly, what I want to do is just refactor this because I hate leaving functions inline like this. I think it's a little sloppy. So what I'll do is I'll just make a class function for this. Okay, let's call this handle first name change. Okay, and we're going to use that event reference that we were just talking about. And just so you know, you can call this whatever you want. You'll often see people just calling this E. You could call it watermelon if you wanted to, but let's just try to at least be somewhat descriptive. But what we can do is just say, hey, we want to set state, okay, and we want to update the first name property to be e.target.value. All right, and now if I get rid of this inline function, what I can do is just provide that handle first name change function that we saw up there. And now we can type whatever we want in here. Okay, so now we have a controlled form, or at least this input element is controlled right here. So I want to take a quick break right here. I want to present to you guys a challenge. See if you can rig up these other input elements to be controlled by React, and then add one extra input element of your own. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video, see if you can do that, and if not, I'm going to code through that right now. Okay, so we can see that we have a few more inputs right here. This one is last name. So, I could make another function called handle last name change. And you can pretty much guess that it's going to be exactly the same, except instead of updating the first name state property, we want to update the last name. Okay. So what we can do is just say last name is going to be event.target.value. Okay, and what we can do is just copy this down a few lines and pretty much repeat that same process for the other input elements we have. Okay, so this third one is going to be the email. I'll update the name of the function right here, handle email change. And then this last one is going to be the message. So I'll say handle message change, not message name. I don't think I think I just want this to say handle email change. Okay, and then I'll just update this message right here. Okay, and then if I type anything in here, I can see that I'm still not able to type anything, and that's because I haven't provided the onChange function that we just wrote to our input elements. Okay, so this first name input element is good to go. What we want to do is update this last name right here. We're going to say, hey, your onChange property is going to be this handle last name change. Okay, and we'll do the same thing for the email and the text area. Okay, and now we can see that we can type stuff in here. Good times, all right? And if you wanted to create one new property of your own, I guess we could just maybe come in here and, we'll use this as an example. And let's say this is going to be middle name. We're just making a new property right here. The value is going to be this.state.middle name, which doesn't exist yet. This function is going to be handle middle name change, okay, which also doesn't exist yet. So let's go ahead and create those. All right, and I'll just come in between the first name and the last name because naturally this is the middle name. So it shows up in between the first and the last name, okay? And then we will take this scaffolding that we built and we will make good use of it just by updating the name of the function right here, handle middle name change, and then we're going to update this middle name property right here. Okay, and then if we come into our React Dev Tools, we can see that everything can get updated and it is all good times, right? Good times. But you may be thinking that this is kind of a PETA. Okay, and if you don't know what that means it's a kind of a pain in the ass to write a function for every single input that we have to update right here. Okay, so instead of doing that, there is a shorthand syntax that we can take advantage of. So let's go ahead and show that next. Okay, so our goal right now is to have one handle change function that can work for all of these different input elements so that we don't have to code a new one out every single time. Okay, so all I've done right here is I just went to all of the input elements we had on our page and I replaced all the names with handle input change. Okay, so instead of handle first name change, handle last name change, it's just handle input change right now. And then all I'm doing in this function is I'm just console.logging the event.target. Okay, and if you remember from before, the event.target is just the input element that we're interacting with whenever this onChange event gets triggered. Okay, so I just came into this first name input and I typed some nonsense in here, and you can see it's just console.logging the event.target, the input element that we're working with right now. Okay, so we already saw how we can get the value of what's being typed in here. Okay, if we just console.log event.target.value, okay, you see we have this value attribute right here. Well, now if we just console.log the event.target.value, we can see what we're typing in as we type, right? But one nice little trick we can also do is if we come into this input element right here, I'll come into the first name input element, okay? And if I give this a name property, and you may be thinking we could call this Billy or Bobby or something, but I'm gonna call him first name, okay? Because that's what he is, okay? So I'm just gonna give this first name input element right here a name property of first name, okay? And then if I get rid of this value right here, so that we're just console.logging the event.target. Okay, and now if I type in here, I can see that now I'm seeing the input element, but we also have this name property right here, okay? And the value of it is first name. Okay, so the trick that we can do is we can give all of our inputs right here names that will correspond with the state value that we want to update, okay? So if I come to this last name input right here, or this is the middle name, if I come to the middle name input right here, okay, and I say, hey, your name is going to be middle name, okay, and then I save it, what I can see is that if I type in the first name input, we see that first name shows up. If I type in this middle name input, the middle name shows up. Okay, so you can see that we can just give these some name properties, and we can essentially use these to wire up the state that we want to update. So you may be thinking, okay, that's pretty simple. I'll just call this dot set state, okay, and I'll pass in a brand new state object, and I'll just say event dot target dot, and we saw that we wanted to access this name property that we're giving to our input elements right here, event.target.name, okay? And then we just want to pass in whatever the user is typing into that input box. So we can access that by event.target.value, okay? But if you try to save that, it'll basically say, hey, the syntax is invalid, okay? So the workaround for this is to put this key right here in a set of brackets. Okay, and we can get rid of this console.log statement right here, and we can refresh our page, okay? And if we type in here a bunch of nonsense, we can see in our app that our state values are getting updated, okay? Because we're drilling down into the name of whatever this input field is and using that input name to correspond with the state that we want to update. Okay, so you may be wondering, like, where the hell are these brackets coming from? Okay, and these brackets right here, what you can do is you can Google computed property names. You'll probably find yourself at the developer Mozilla docs, okay? And what they'll explain to you is that if you want to evaluate what you're typing as an expression inside of an object, all you have to do is put a pair of brackets around it, okay? Very similar to how if we're writing some JSX right here, and we want to access this .props my prop name, okay, you'd have to put it in a pair of curly braces, or else it would be evaluated as JSX and not JavaScript, okay? Very similar when we want to write an expression to set the key of an object, we'd have to put this in a pair of brackets, okay? So this bracket syntax is a little weird, and the event.target.name.value, that's a little weird too, but you know, we kind of talked about where it's coming from and why it works. So all we'd need to do from here is just go to the rest of our inputs and give them a name, so that whenever we call this handle input change function, we can evaluate what the name of the input is and then set the corresponding state value to whatever we're typing in. And I know I kind of repeated myself 1,000 times, but I'm just trying to beat the dead horse to make sure I've gotten the point across, okay? So we did this process for the first name. We did it for the middle name. How about we just come into this third input here? This is going to be the last name, okay? This email right here, your name is going to be email, okay? And it's yelling at me because I'm supposed to use an equal sign right here. And as I'm giving these names, I'm just making sure that the state value is corresponding, because if this is message right here, and I come to this final text area, and I give this a name of my MSG, you know, my message, and then I come to my React app and I start typing in here, okay, you can see that nothing is getting updated inside of our input value, right? Because this input value right here, his value is set to whatever this.state.message is right here, okay? And if we gave it the wrong name, as we can see down here, my message, what's happening is that the handle input change is working, but we're creating a new state value called my MSG, okay? So the only rule with using this shorthand syntax is that you got to use the brackets to evaluate the name of your input element as JavaScript. And then I guess I lied, there's a second rule. You have to make sure that your names right here that you're giving to these input elements correspond with the state values that you wrote up here. Okay, so now we can see, we can come into all of these and type whatever we want, and our state is getting updated. Okay, so we basically have a controlled form in React. Now the only thing that we have left to do is to set up the onSubmit functionality for this form, okay? Because it's cool that React knows what we're typing in here and what's going on, and we can update everything, but it's completely useless unless we actually are able to send this form and like send some data and do some cool stuff with it, okay? So let's see how to do the onSubmit stuff next. Okay, so let's write the code that will allow us to tap into these values that we have control over and actually do something whenever we try to submit the form right here. Okay, so the way we can do that is by coming to this form right here, right inside of the opening tag, and giving it an onSubmit event. Okay, and this onSubmit event is basically what happens whenever we click our button down here at the bottom of the form and try to submit it. Okay, so you can kind of see the common theme of input elements or certain HTML elements having an event that we can say, hey, whenever this event fires, we want to do something, and then we just provided a callback function. Okay, so what we can do just for now is let's just make an inline arrow function, and then whenever this form gets submitted, what we'll do is just console.log submitted. Okay, and we don't have to do anything with this button down here. Since it is inside of a form, the form pretty much knows that the user is trying to submit the form. Okay, so all we really have here is a little arrow function right here that should say submitted whenever we click this button. Okay, so we can pop open the console right here and we will click on send message. Okay, and you see submitted showed up for a brief moment, and then the page refreshed and went to this weird URL. Do we have a bug? Did we code something wrong? You know, what's going on here? Well, the issue that we're seeing right now is that the default behavior for a form is to try to take the data values that it has inside of it, and it tries to send those values somewhere and then refresh the page. But since we're coding in React, we want to provide a nice single page experience and only refresh things on the page whenever we have to. Okay, so we shouldn't really ever have to refresh the page manually like that, like how the form does by default. Okay, so what we can do to overwrite that is tap into this event parameter that we have available to us from within our callback function right here inside of this event, right? And what we can do is we can just say event.prevent default. Hey, that rhymes. Okay, and then I'll save it right now. And if we take a look now, we can see it. I'm clicking the button right here and we're not getting a refresh. The page isn't doing anything crazy. Okay, and that's because we're essentially using this event.prevent default method to stop the form from doing what it does naturally, right? We're preventing it from refreshing the page and ruining our good time. Okay, so you can read a little bit more about that on Developer Mozilla, but they basically say, hey, you can use the event interface to prevent the default behavior whatever event you're using. Okay, so I don't think we just want to do absolutely nothing. So how about instead of making this all an inline function, what we can do is give this a function of this dot handle submit, okay, which doesn't exist yet, but what we can do is just code that out right now. So let's make a new class function and call this handle submit. We're going to make use of that event parameter that I'm just going to call e, right? So the first thing we want to do is say event.prevent default, right? We don't want to refresh the page. We don't want you to try to send the stuff yourself. We'll take care of that for them. You just hang in the back, you chill out, everything will be good. Okay. So what we're gonna do to start off with is how about we just make a console.log statement and see if this is working. Okay. We'll say test submit right here. Okay. And now whenever we click on this button and this onSubmit event runs within our form, we should be using this handle submit method that will stop the default behavior from happening, and also console.log test submit. Okay, so let's take a quick look in our console. Okay, and if I click this, I see test submit. Okay, and we're not getting any crazy page refresh, nothing scary, and it's all good in the hood. Okay. So our goal is to eventually be able to type everything in this form, you know, put whatever we want in here, and then send an email, right? There's the email on my phone. But for now, we still have a few more things to cover before we set up this email portion of it. So for the time being, how about we just make an alert, and then we'll console.log everything that was typed into the form, okay? So what we can do is just say alert, okay? And we'll just alert all of these state values that we have, okay? So what we can do is just make a template string right here, okay? So I'll put a pair of backticks, okay? And then a $ and curly braces. This allows us to put variables inside of our strings, okay? And the first thing I can alert is the first name. So I'll say this dot state dot first name, and let me just come right before this variable and just write out the first name, okay? So it kind of shows up as like a label, okay? And I'll repeat that process for the rest of the state values. I won't film the whole thing because that'll take forever. Okay, so I have all the values in here, okay? So what we'll just do is make an alert in the console, okay? And then we will literally just say what the first name is, you know, what all these state values are, middle name, last name, so on and so forth. Okay, so we can take a quick test there and just put a bunch of nonsense in here, you know, whatever you want, okay? And since this input down here is a type of email, it's got some built-in form validation saying, hey, this is not a valid string value for an email address, okay? So I'll just say nonsense@nonsense.com, okay? And now I can see that my form is submitting, okay? And I get a little alert on the page, and it just tells me all of the values that we have typed into this form right here, okay? And then you'll notice after the form has been submitted, the values just kind of hang here, okay? And I'm sure you guys have maybe, you know, filled out a form online when you're on like Amazon or some other website. But typically what happens after you submit a form is the values don't just stay there. They go away back to their initial state, right? So I think that's something that we would also want to do inside of our handle submit method, okay? So we can code that little piece out right here. What we can do once the form has been submitted is just call this .setState, okay? And we'll pass in a brand new state object right here. And what we can do is just copy all of these values and then just put them into our setState method, okay? And now we can see I'll write a bunch of nonsense here, okay? And then once the alert is done, it goes back to its initial values, and the page didn't even have to refresh. We only re-rendered what we had to, okay? And one little optimization we can do, if you notice here that we have this object with all these values right here, and then the exact same thing. I'm sure you've heard this before, but we want to keep our code dry and not wet, right? Where dry stands for don't repeat yourself, and wet stands for writing everything twice or maybe 3 times. but we definitely have a nice little opportunity to cut back on some code right here. So how about instead of just rewriting this every single time, how about we make a variable for this state object right here? Okay, so what we can do is we can come up above the class and say const initial state. Okay, and this constant is going to be in capital letters. That's the convention. And then we'll just paste our state values right here. Okay, and then instead of writing them out every single time, what we can do is just pass a reference to this initial state variable that has an object with all of these initial key value pairs. Okay, so we can say initial state, and then down here we can set state to initial state. Okay, and you'll see that I'm not providing a pair of curly braces right here, and that is because the curly braces are already right here, right? This object has a pair of curly braces already, okay? So there's no need to put this initial state variable in a set of curly braces when it already has one, okay? And we can just make sure that it works, put a bunch of nonsense here, okay? And it still works as usual. Now, one thing you may notice is that if we just come down here and click on send message, we're still able to just send the form as it is with no values at all, okay? And you can see how this would be a problem. People could probably just come down here and send us like 1 billion emails by clicking on this button over and over again with no values in them at all, okay? So what we can do is just write a little bit of manual form validation to make sure that we're actually getting some values in here, and we can prevent the user from submitting this form unless those values are actually there. Okay, that's a pretty common thing that we'd want to do. So let's see how to do that next. Okay, so what we want to do right now is just write a little bit of form validation that will prevent the user from submitting an empty form, okay? So some of this is going to be a little bit of refresher work because we're essentially just going to take some state values, write some logic based off of our state so we can have our application, kind of do something a little bit different. But then we'll talk about something a little bit new, okay? So let's talk about the first part, the former, which is just working with our state to do a little bit of conditional rendering, okay? So what do we want to do here? Well, we want to check to see if any of these input fields are empty, probably excluding the middle name because not everybody has a middle name. But if the first name or the last name or the email or the message are empty, then we probably want to short circuit the function. We don't want to alert the user or eventually send the email like we're planning to do, and we don't want to reset the state back to their initial values. What we want to do is just cut this part of the function off. Okay, so what we can do is we can write an if statement, okay, and then we got to think to ourselves, what are the conditions? Well, how about let's start with this first name input. If first name is empty, let's just write the statement for that. So if this dot state dot first name, right, that's the value of whatever is in this input field. If it is equal to an empty string, right, that's what we have when we are starting, right? That's like the default value. If there's nothing in there, well, then we would want to do something, okay? And that's something that we want to do to start out is short-circuiting the rest of the logic, okay? So what we can do is we can just put a return keyword here, and this return basically cuts off everything else that the function will do, right? So now if we just click send message, we're not seeing any alert icon showing up, which is good. That means that later down the line, we wouldn't be able to send an empty email. But how about we take it one step further? How about we, provide the user a little bit of a better experience by showing, maybe like a little error message on the screen saying, hey, you got some stuff to fill out, buddy. Would you forget your first name? Maybe not insult them, but let's do that. So how about instead of just short-circuiting this, and I'm just kind of thinking through this thing, maybe we could make a new piece of state called error, okay? And if error is true, then down here in our JSX, we could show them an error message, okay? So that would be pretty easy to do. We'd need to add a new piece of state into our initial state. Okay, we'll call this error, and we'll set this to false by default. Okay, and then what we can do if this first name field is empty is we can call this dot set state. Okay, and we'll pass in a new state object, and then we want to update this error property that we just created right here. Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and set that to true. Okay, and then down here in the JSX, I think what we can do is probably come inside of the form right here, and we can do some conditional rendering. Okay, so we could use the ternary operator that we saw in some previous videos. What we can do is write an expression if this dot state dot error, okay, if it's true, then what we're going to want to do is return a, how about we just return a label, and then we say you done goofed. Okay, you done goofed, and then if the expression is false, then we just don't want to return anything, right? We only want to show this if there is an error. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, let's say we remembered our middle name, our last name, and then we just clicked send. We see you done goofed. Okay, but how about let's give them a little bit of a better experience. What I'm going to do is write a little bit of CSS to make this error message red. That's kind of what people expect to see. You know, it's kind of like some red text, or, you know, something red saying, hey, something went wrong. So let me just write some CSS. Okay guys, I wrote some CSS right here. It's pretty much the exact same thing as the label, except I took the align self start out of the equation and I made the font color red. Okay, and then what we can do is just give this label a class name of error. Okay, and then I'll save that, and then if we see here, you done goofed. Okay, maybe that's not the most descriptive error message in the world, but I'm gonna keep it as it is for the time being, okay, because I think it's funny. All right, so one quick thing we can do right here is, if you know by now, I don't really like having these expressions like this in the JSX. I think it's a little clunky to look at. So how about we just make a little helper method to do this for us. He's gonna be our little helper. We're gonna call this render error, okay, and I'll just make this an arrow function because everything else is an arrow function, and also this prevents us from having to bind this function to the constructor. So what I can do is pretty much just repeat that logic. I can say return this dot state dot error, okay, and then how about instead of typing this by hand, I'll just go ahead and copy all of this right here. Okay, so it pretty much just does exactly the same thing. We provided a return keyword just to make sure that this value is actually getting returned right here. And then let me fix this extra space right here. Okay, so instead of having that whole expression right there, we can just say this dot render error. Okay, and I'll give it some parentheses. Okay, and then if we try to submit our form, we see it still says you done goofed. Okay, so that is the basic form validation. I think we also have to tie this in with the rest of our code right here. We still need the last name, the email, and the message. Okay, so as a little challenge, see if you can make a helper function to evaluate if any of these fields right here are empty. If they are, then we want to show them the error message. Okay. So go ahead and try that. You can pause the video if you want. Otherwise, I'm just going to code it out right now. Okay, so we have a good amount of fields to check for. We got first name, last name, email, message. Okay, and if we're putting all of this inside of the handle submit method, it's going to start to get a little bit clunky. Okay, and one rule that you probably want to keep in mind is that functions should really only do one thing. Okay, and if we're evaluating all of these input fields right here, well, that's not really something that the submit does. The submit is supposed to just take the data and send it somewhere. So that's kind of the reason for me explaining why we should be probably making a separate function for this. So how about we just go ahead and do that. Let's come down here right below the handle submit, and let's check handle valid input. I guess that's a good name for it. I don't know, you could probably come up with something better. Okay, and we'll just make a little arrow function right here. And what I'm going to do is just evaluate if any of these inputs are in their empty string values. Then I want to do something. So let me just code that out. Okay, I have all my values coded out. You can see I just have an if statement right here. I said if this.state.firstname is an empty string, is last name, email, message, blah, blah, blah. And then I just used the or operator on multi-lines just so this thing wasn't going all the way across the screen. Okay, so what we're going to want to do if this is the case is we want to set the state. We want to set error to be true. Okay. And then what we also want to do is return false right here. Okay, and if this if statement does not run, that means that we have input values in all of our forms. Okay, so what we'll do right here is just return true. Okay, and you'll see why I'm doing that in just a moment. And let me not forget to put a return keyword here. And instead of calling this handle valid input, I'm going to actually be a little bit more descriptive. I'm going to call this is input valid. So now what I've done here is I made a very subtle change in the name. I said is input valid, right? If you're reading through this code and you see a function that says if this dot is input valid, right? That's kind of like some self-documenting code. It explains exactly what it is as you're reading it. So is the input valid? Okay, and if any of these are not valid, then we'll set the state of error to be true, and then we'll return false, all right? Otherwise, the error message will just remain false, and we will return true right here. Okay, so what we're doing right here is we're evaluating if this function is returning true. But I think what we want to do is evaluate if this function is returning false, right? If the input is not valid, then what we would want to do is just return right here. Don't do anything else. We can just short circuit the rest of the function. Otherwise, we'll do the alert or the email as we'll see later, and then we return state to its initial value, which would change error to be false right here. Okay, so that's my little helper function. Let's see if it's working. I can see you done goofed. How about I just go ahead and put a first name in here, okay? Last name, still not going. I'll put my email in here, okay? And then I'll put a message in here, okay? And now it should have everything that it needs, okay? Let's go ahead and see. We see the alert happens and then the form gets reset. Okay, so just a little bit of form validation, and we didn't really do anything new here. All we did was just make a little helper function. We used some descriptive words, and then we made use of it by saying, hey, is the input not valid? If it's not valid, then just short circuit it, kill it. All right, don't do anything else. Otherwise, keep on living your life. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so that is the basic stuff right there. I want to show you one more nice little form validation thing you can do, and that form validation thing is called onBlur. Okay, so let's talk about that next. Okay, so the way handle blur works is whenever we click inside of an input element, as soon as we click off of that input element, that point in time is when the onBlur event gets called. Okay, so unlike the onChange and onSubmit method that we saw for the input fields and the form right here, onBlur doesn't really do the best job of explaining what's happening. Okay, so hopefully we could probably just write a little console.log statement right here that might be able to explain what's going on a little bit better. Okay, so let's come to our first name input right here, and let's give this guy an onBlur event. Okay, and what we want to do whenever this gets triggered is how about we just console.log blur was triggered. Okay, and we'll go ahead and save that, and let's just take a look in the console and see when this event is firing. Okay, so I'm going to click inside of this first name field, and then as soon as I click out of it, I can see blur was triggered. Okay, that's kind of the point in time when this function runs. Okay, and I think what our goal is right now is to set this border to be red if they exit the input field but they didn't leave any value inside of here, okay? So let's kind of see how we could do that. I guess the first step would be to give all of the fields that we want to have an onBlur method, okay? So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, this first name, it's going to have an onBlur event, which is going to call a function that we will call this.handleBlur, okay? And we have not made this yet. And let's just go ahead and give this to the input fields that we want. Not everybody has a middle name, so we'll skip that one for now. But we will do the last name, we will do the email, and then we will do the message, okay? So now everybody has an onBlur method, and now we just need to create that handleBlur method that we said we we're going to create. Okay, so handleBlur, okay, it's going to be an arrow function, and we're going to make use of the event interface that we've been using so often, okay, just so we can, get some data with whatever input fields we're working with, okay. And then what we need to do is figure out what are our conditions. Well, we want to check to see if they're leaving this input field, right, which is what happens when onBlur gets called. But whenever we leave, what we want to do is check to see, hey, did they leave the value empty? Okay, that's kind of the condition that we would want to write this for. Okay, so we could probably say something like if event.target.value, that's what we were using to code our onChange method up here, okay, what we can probably do is say, hey, if event.target.value.length is equal to 0, right? Or in other words, did they leave this and not type anything in here? Okay, then how about we just write a couple of console.log tests. So for the first one, we'll just say input is empty, okay? And then otherwise, what we can do is we can write an else statement and say input not empty, sure. Okay, and now if we save this, let's go ahead and refresh our page right here. And now I'm going to click out of here. I see the input is empty, but now if I type some stuff and I come out, I see the input is not empty. Not empty. I empty it out. The input is empty. Okay, and you can test that out. Okay, so with some console.log statements, we found the points in time that we need to code the rest of this logic out. Okay, so we have our condition. Now we need to think to ourselves, okay, well, how would we set this border to red if this statement right here is true? Well, what we could probably do is create some state, okay? And this state would probably be something like a true or false value. And I think we're going to have to kind of follow a similar route that we did for all of our inputs. So we're going to have to add a few more state values down here. Let's call them, I guess we'll call them first name empty blur, right? The name of the input, and then is it empty whenever the blur method gets called. Kind of the best thing I could think of. And we will set these to false by default. Okay, and I'll copy this down a few lines. And let me just update the names here. Okay, so we have our state values right here. And I think what we're going to want to do is use these points in time that we found with our console.log statements to set these values from false to true or vice versa. So we already saw that if the value that was typed into the input element is completely empty, then this console.log statement will fire. So how can we use this point in time to update this state value? Okay, I'll give you a hint. It's going to be pretty similar to what we did with this handle change for the multiple inputs. But we're going to do the same thing for the blur event. It's just going to be a little bit more hacky, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to try to call setState, but instead of just using the event.target.name, what we're going to have to do is add the words empty blur onto here, okay? So that when we're trying to set the state, the key that we're trying to access is going to correspond with the state value that we want to update, okay? So instead of going for the home run, I'm just going to go for first base right now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of try to console my way through I guess, what this would be. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is take a look at event.target.name. Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm getting the correct input values. Whenever I click in these things, I see I got first name, last name, email, and message. Okay, that's the first part of it. Now all of these have the words empty blur on them. So how about instead of just console.logging that, what I'll do is I'll take this and put it in a pair of backticks, okay, and then I can use the string templates, okay, since I'm in a set of backticks. What I can do is write the $ curly brace, and then I can put JavaScript inside of these curly braces, okay, and then everything on the outside of the $ curly braces is just going to be evaluated as a regular string. So if I just concatenate the word empty, what did I call it, empty blur. Okay, let's take a look. We should have the name of our state value. First name empty blur, last name empty blur, email empty blur, and message empty blur. Okay, let's take a look. First name, last name, empty email, email empty blur, and message empty blur. Okay, so kind of a nice little hack right here. So what we're going to want to do if the length of this is 0 is we're going to want to set these corresponding state values to true. Okay, so what we can do is we can call this .set state. Okay, and hold on to your something right now. This syntax is going to be a little crazy. We've got our brackets, right? Because we can't just write JavaScript in the key of an object. We need to put it in brackets so we can evaluate this, what we're about to write right here. And then we're going to put a set of backticks, okay, so we can put variables inside of our string value right here. And then we're going to put a pair of $ curly braces so we can put a JavaScript variable inside of our string. This is going to be event.target.name. And then on the outside of that, we're going to put empty string. Jesus Christ. Okay. That syntax is a little gnarly, but I mean, sometimes syntax is gnarly like that, you know, just give it a chance, okay? It actually, if you know what each piece of it is doing, it's actually not too bad, okay? Just don't look at it and lose your mind like I used to on those long summer nights. Anyways, I digress. This is going to be the object key that we're assigning in our state. And then what do we want to assign? Well, if the length of it is 0, we're going to want to say, hey, we're going to set this state value to be true, because that means when the blur method fired and there's nothing in there, so it's empty, right? Otherwise, we'll pretty much just copy this guy down right here and paste the same thing in. That syntax is atrocious, okay? And before we go any further with taking these state values that should be working and tying them in with our UI to do some conditional rendering, it's a good idea to just take a step back and test this out. Okay, so if we go into our dev tools right here, we can see the first one we see is email empty blur. It is set to false by default. If I click in here and then I come off, we can see that email empty string is true. What the heck? Empty string, that's not, okay, I meant to say empty blur. Okay, so the fact that I tested this out definitely saved me a little bit of a headache later and having to restart this portion of the tutorial recording. Okay, so let's just say I did that on purpose just to demonstrate the importance of testing. Okay, so let's try again. Email empty blur, it's false. I click in here, I come out, it's true, okay? And then if I come in and I type some nonsense, it goes back to false, right? Because it's evaluating, hey, is what the person just typed in here, is the length of it 0? Okay, if it is, then what we're gonna want to do is set this state value to true, saying, hey, we got an empty state value. Otherwise, we will set it to false, saying, hey, there's a value in here. Okay, so as we've seen in the tutorials so far and tutorials in the past, state allows us to do some conditional rendering. So now all we have to do is write some CSS to essentially create a red border that will only be applied when that piece of state is true or false. So what I'll do first is write the CSS for that. Okay guys, here is my CSS. Okay, I just pretty much copied this input border that we had right here, except I changed the border to red right there. Definitely not dry code by any means. I wrote pretty much everything twice, but I'm just trying to make it through this tutorial video in one piece. Okay. So I digress. So all we have to do now is just come on down to our input elements, okay? And we could probably write a helper function for this, but I'm feeling a little bit lazy. So what I'm gonna do is just do this calculation inline right here. So instead of just passing in the class name of label, what I'm gonna do is write a ternary expression. All right, what we want to do is take a look and say, hey, this dot state dot first name empty blur, right? We want to say, hey, first name empty blur, are you true? Okay, question mark, are you true? Question mark. If you are, the class name that you're going to get is this new CSS class that we made right here, which is input error. Okay, so if you're true, then you're going to have the class name of input error. Otherwise, you're going to have the class name of just the regular input. Okay, so you don't have to just pass in a string to the class name. You can give it a pair of curly braces and write some ternary expressions. And you're kind of seeing the power of React. You know, you got JavaScript all over the place, helper functions out the wazoo. It's just nuts. So let's take a look. Please work. I don't want to restart this portion of the tutorial video. Okay, we've got some red border going on because we clicked in, we clicked out, and now if I come back and I type some stuff, it goes back to normal. Okay, so it's a nice little user experience that we can give the user, saying, hey, you got to fill it out. They can put 2 and 2 together. And if they can't, well, they're probably old. I hate to say it, but they're probably old. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm joking. I digress. But I know some of my family members probably couldn't figure that out. But anyways, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the class names to the input fields that we want to do this for. Okay, so let me just copy this down. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll give this to the last name right here. I'll update the state variable that we're checking. Okay, we want to check this dot state dot last name empty blur. Okay, and then what I'll do is come down to the email right here. Okay, and instead of checking the last name, we'll check this dot state dot email empty blur. Okay, if it is, if the input field was empty whenever they left, then we're going to add that input error class. Otherwise, we're going to add the regular input class, and we will copy that exact same thing for this text area. And apparently, this tutorial is never going to end because these random things keep happening to me. Okay, so let's say message empty blur, message empty blur. Okay, and I'll save that and just do a quick test. Does this stuff turn red? It sure do. And Scooby-Doo, okay, Scooby-Doo. So that was just a nice little bit of form validation right there. Just so you know, there are third-party tools that would make this whole process a lot easier for you, okay? And you know, what I'll say right here is that working with forms in React is kind of a PETA, if you remember what I explained what that is. It can be a pain, you know. There's a lot of syntax to remember. This is awful on the eyes, and then all of this code doesn't even really do that great of a validation job either. It just checks if they're empty, you know. Someone could put like 1 character in here, maybe you want a minimum character set, And what I'm trying to get around to saying is that there are third-party packages that can help you do this part of React, right? There is one of the most popular ones I know about is Formic, and then they use Yup to validate their forms. But it's just good to know how these things work before you start throwing all these third-party tools into your React applications. If all you want to do is check if the field is empty, then there's no reason to bring a whole nother dependency into your project. Okay, you guys, so I think I got through all of the form stuff I wanted to talk about. It is a miracle. I was thinking this tutorial was going to be quick. Apparently I was wrong. But we are basically done talking about all the fun React stuff right now. And now all we have to do is just, I guess, the rest of it, which is making this form be able to send an email, okay, and then having a little toast notification so we can have a nicely polished contact page that people are going to be impressed with if you can show them, okay? So I'll try to get through it quick, and let's do that next. Let's go ahead and get set up with email.js so we can actually use this contact form that we created to send emails and have them actually show up in our inbox, okay? So what you'll have to do is sign up, okay? I'll go ahead and do that now, and then just skip to the next page, but obviously you would just use your own name and your own email, okay, and then once you're signed in, you'll probably end up at this page right here, okay, and what you can do is just click on Add New Service, okay, and they basically ask you, what email service are you using, so if you're building this for a client and they're using Yahoo, then that's one you would choose. I'm just going to go ahead and click on Gmail right here, okay, and I'll call this contact page demo, okay, and there's a bunch of IDs that we're going to have to use in order to get this thing to work, okay, so just take a note of this service ID right here, and if you don't, we'll see how we can find it later, okay, and then we'll just go ahead and click on connect account, okay, and then a pop-up will probably show up. You'll probably have to give it permissions. And then once you've given it access, you can just go ahead and click on Create Service. Okay, so that's good. And by the way, you can always just click on the docs to get the step-by-step tutorial if you prefer that. But the next thing we're going to do after we've created our service is we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on this Email Templates button. Okay, I already have one here, so I'll just go ahead and delete that and create a new one. Okay, and what they do right here is they give you some variables right here, and they put them in two sets of curly braces, okay? And these are going to be the variables of data that we're going to be sending to our server. So if you take a look at our app, what do you think we would be sending here? Well, we have a first name, a middle name, a last name, an email, and a message, right? So as you're filling out your template, you're going to want to make sure that you use those values. And the only thing you got to keep in mind is that the values that you have coded in your state are going to need to correspond with the values that you're sending to your server. Obviously, you could change the variable names, but it would probably just be a little bit easier to make sure everything is corresponding so you don't have to do any extra work or write any extra code. Okay, so we have first name, middle name, last name, email, and message. Let's go ahead and do that here. They're using a from name right here, which I'm assuming that is the first and last name. So let's make this template say new message from first name. Okay, and then we're using a last name, so we'll put that variable in there. Right, this is like the data that we're going to be sending from our front end to their service. Okay, and then what they have right here, they're saying hello to name. I guess that's like some value that they put in there. I don't really want to use it, but what I'm going to do is kind of write this template out. It says you got a new message from. Okay, let's copy these variables right here. Okay, and what else are we going to need? I'm remembering that we also have a middle name, so how about we just put that in there as well. Middle name, okay, and then we'll put it right here. It's a serious email service when you're sending a middle name. It's a big deal. Okay, so you put the message right there. That's going to be coming from our text area. And I think the last thing we need is an email. Do we have the email in here anywhere? It looks like we don't, okay? So I guess what we can do down here is just, kind of put that in our template. We could say contact email, okay? And that's going to be the email that we send from the front end, okay? And you can pretty much style this, make it say whatever the heck you want, but I think this is good enough. All you really need to know is that the variables that they use in their templates, that's going to correspond with the data that you're sending from your app right here, okay? And they put them in 2 sets of curly braces, all right? So let's go ahead and save that. And it says the template was successful, okay? And now what we're going to want to do is implement this, okay? So if you were to take a look in the docs, you'd be able to scroll down here and see they have a React example that we could follow along with, okay? And all that we really have to do is import the package that we installed in the beginning of the tutorial, and then call this email.js.sendForm function, okay? And then all that they ask is that we provide to them some values, okay? And then whatever we want to do after that will be taken care of, okay? And obviously whenever we click this button, that's when we want to send our form. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is just come into our VS Code, okay? And let's go ahead and just import, okay? And you would read this from the docs if you were checking their documentation. What we're going to want to do is import send from email.js-com, okay? And then after that, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put this piece of functionality into our handle submit method, okay? So how about instead of alerting in the browser, what we're going to want to do is actually send an email, okay? So what we're going to do right here is we're going to call this send method that we got from the email.js package, okay? And then what they require that we pass in here is our service ID, okay? They're also going to want a template ID, okay? And they're also going to want the data that we want to send. So I'll just say like an empty object for now. And then what they're going to want is a user ID, okay? So the way we can find those values, if you come to email.js and then you just click on email services, you'll see you can find your service ID right here, okay? So I'll go ahead and copy that. And don't try to take my service ID. I'm going to disconnect this service. If you try to use my service ID, it won't work, okay? So we got the service ID. Then we need the template ID, okay? So if we click on email templates, what we can do is we can just come in here and it vanished out of thin air. Where did you go? You were there and now you're gone. Can I just copy this right here? Okay, and I'll just put that in the place of the template ID, kind of just following along with the instructions that they want, okay? And then we need to send an object of data, okay? So I have an empty object right here. What I can do is just say, hey, I want to send this.state.firstName. Oops, and I forgot an object needs key value pairs. So we'll say first name, right? This will correspond with the first name variable inside of the template. So we're going to say first name is going to be this.state.firstName, okay? And then we're also going to say middle name, okay, which will be this.state.last. What am I talking about? I've been coding for too long. Then we're going to have last name right here, which is going to be this.state.lastName. We're also going to want to send the email, okay, this.state.email. And then we're going to want to send the message, okay, which is going to be this.state.message. Okay, so I know I said that your state values their names need to correspond with whatever variable names you have in the template. I guess I was lying to you because you can just say what the key is. The key of the object that you're sending in this email needs to correspond with the variable, okay? I haven't had any caffeine today, and it's my alibi. Okay, and then all we need is the user ID, okay? And we can find that if you go to integration down here, you'll see there will be a user ID, okay, and we can just go ahead and copy that, okay, and then I will paste it in here, okay, and that's all that we're going to need to send that email, okay. But before we go any further, I think what we're going to want to do is write a .then and a .catch block, okay, and I know I haven't talked about what these things are too much, or at all rather, on the channel. But while you're in the process of sending some data somewhere on the internet, this .then block basically says, hey, wait for that to finish, and then here's what we want to happen once that's resolved, okay? And then the .catch block, which we'll see in a moment here, is what will happen if this goes horribly, horribly wrong, and then we get an error message, okay? So we're basically just coding out what happens after it succeeds or after it fails, okay? So I won't dive too much into it right now, but what we're gonna do is give a callback function. I'll name this parameter response right here. This is what the email request is responding with. Did it work? Did it not work? Okay. And then what we can do is just console.log success. Okay. And then we'll log the response.status just so we can take a look, and the response.text. Okay. This is all data that is coming back from this email.js server whenever we make contact with it. Okay, and then I think what we want to do after this is, instead of setting the state back to the initial state down here, I think what we want to do is put it up here, okay, in this success block right here, okay? Because if the catch block runs, that means that the form failed to do its job, okay? And then we don't want to just get rid of their message and their values. What if they took a long time to write that, you know? The only time we want to set this back to its initial state is if everything went according to plan. Otherwise, we won't get rid of their hard work, okay? And then after that, what we'll go ahead and do is just code out the structure for the catch block. So this catch block takes a arrow function as well. The first parameter is an error, which is just like the error that was sent back if this failed, okay? And what we can do is just console.log failed, and then we will just take a look at the error, okay? So that is basically the structure for the email right here, right there, okay? And then the last thing that we want to do is get set up with react-toastify, so we can get that nice little pop-up that shows up whenever we send this form, okay? So what we have to do for that is come up here, and what we'll do is we will import some stuff from react-toastify, okay? Apparently they like bread that's been toasted, okay? So what we're gonna do is import a toast container, and then we're gonna import toast from react-toastify, okay? And then what we also need to do is import some of their styles, okay? So we'll say import react-toastify/dist/react-toastify.css. And one quick note, if you're wondering where I found these packages or why I'm using them, to be honest with you, I just dived down the rabbit hole. I think I typed up like toast react, and the first thing I saw was react-toastify. I clicked on it. I came down here. I said, hey, that looks pretty cool. And then I read through the docs. They explained to me how it works. I pretty much did the exact same process with email.js, okay? So there's no right or wrong way of doing something, but I kind of just stand by the phrase that you always hear, which is don't recreate the wheel. If something nice has been built, then you might as well use it. And if you're freelancing for somebody and they just want their project to be done, well, they don't care what you do and how you do it. They just want it done, and they want it to work well, okay? So don't be afraid to try new packages, see if they work. These are just a few of them that I found as I just Googled it. First thing I found, I went with. Okay, so this is what we need, and if you read through the react-toastify docs, which I'm sure you could do if you're curious, that would just tell you to import that, okay? And then in order to use this react-toast thing, what we gotta do is create a couple of functions right here. So let's just come down here below the handle error, okay? What we'll do is we'll make a function that will render a success toast, all right? This is the one we see whenever the email goes through. So if we say success toast, we're going to return a function that calls toast. Okay, the first thing that you put into here is what you want to say inside of your message. So if you said like message went through, that's what you would see whenever the toast would pop up. I think what I'm going to do is copy this little thank you text that I wrote over here. Okay, so I'll just paste that there. So that's the one that will run whenever the toast is successful. Okay, and we'll see how to use that in a second. But then we also want one if something goes wrong. Okay, so what we can do is call this function error toast, which will be a function that calls toast.error. Right, this is all coming from the react-toastify package. And then we just have to provide to it a message. What do we want to say in the box right there? I think we'd probably just want to say something went wrong. Please try again later. Okay. So this toast right here, that's going to be the white one with the rainbow background. This toast.error comes with like some red background, red styling. They give us some pretty nice out of the box styles. Okay. And then all we need to do is tell react-toastify when we want to see these functions get called. Okay, so the point in time when we want to see this is whenever the email goes through. So what we'll go ahead and do is come into the .then block right here. As I mentioned, this is what happens if the email makes it through to the other side. Okay, so we'll just call our success toast function. Okay, and then if something goes horribly wrong, what we'll do is call the this.errorToast function. Pretty simple stuff, all right? And if we take a look, I hope it's working. Let's see. I want to send an email. I want to say, hey, your tutorials suck. Okay, so let's go ahead and send that. So two things went wrong there. For some reason, none of my services or templates saved, so I had to go through and recreate those. I have no idea what happened, but now I have the correct template variables and service ID and user ID. Okay, and then the other thing, what we had was an error, and we didn't see our error toast, and the reason for that is because we were supposed to be using this toast container right here, okay, that we imported from react-toastify. Okay, so all I did was I just rendered that inside of the area where we're putting all of our JSX, okay, because without this we won't actually see any of the toast components showing up. Okay, and I made it a sibling to the app component, and if you're wondering what this is right here, this is a React fragment. So instead of wrapping all of this in like a div, what you can just do is say react.fragment, or you could just leave an empty opening tag and an empty closing tag. Okay, and it'll essentially allow you to return all of these DOM elements without having an extra DOM wrapping all of them. So that's pretty much everything. Fingers crossed here. Let's go ahead and see if it works. Okay, so I'm just going to come into my form here, and I'm going to type some nonsense and be like, your tutorials are too long. Okay, and I'll click send right here, and we can see we've got a nice, oh, my phone went off. Okay, and we've got a nice little React toast right here. Okay, if I go to my Gmail account, okay, and I click on my email, I see I have a nice email. Your tutorials are too long. Okay, good stuff, good stuff. Let's go ahead and just make sure that the error toast is working, because it errored last time and we didn't see anything. Okay, if I come in here and let me just get rid of this like template, this last letter on the template, and then we'll try to send this right here. Okay, we see we get an error, right? And then if we take a look in the console, we can see it gives us a nice little hint. It says the template ID is invalid. Okay, so the error messages are pretty nice there, and we have a nice working form. Okay, we finally got through it, and there's definitely a lot of syntax to keep in mind here, but you know, just take it in stride, try to pull it down, do it for yourself. I'll put the GitHub link in the description. And it's definitely a lot to keep in mind. You know, when you're learning React, it feels like a juggling act. of trying to remember all these concepts, and then someone comes and throws this nonsense at you. But I promise you, just give it some time. It'll get easier and easier. Okay guys, so thank you for watching. If this video helped you out, all I ask is that you comment, like, and subscribe. Do any of those three, if not all three. It would definitely help out the channel. Okay, and if you're interested, I also offer one-on-one tutoring sessions. Just feel free to shoot me an email. I'll put the link in the description. And I think that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, you're a gangster. And I hope you learned something today. I know I did. Okay, guys, thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.